Hello, and welcome to Breast Cancer Conversations, a podcast brought to you by SurvivingBreastCancer.org. I am Laura Carfing, breast cancer survivor and founder of SurvivingBreastCancer.org, a nonprofit organization providing community, education, and resources to empower those diagnosed with breast cancer and their caregivers from day one and beyond. Hi everyone, I am so excited to be joining you today for our latest episode on Breast Cancer Conversations. Welcome back to all of our returning listeners, and if you're new to the podcast, welcome, and we're glad to have you here. I am just so excited. Every week we dive into amazing topics with amazing people about all things breast cancer. Today we are continuing the conversation with Holly, who is going to talk a little bit more about her breast cancer diagnosis and take us on a deep dive and answer all of our burning questions on the hot topic of cold capping. So, without further ado, welcome to the conversation. Holly, it's so great to have you back on the podcast. I know last time we chatted, you were telling us about your adventures in Kuala Lumpur and traveling the world, your daughter living in France and having a baby, how you and your husband sold everything to just travel and live this amazing, wonderful life post a breast cancer diagnosis. Today, I would love to continue the conversation and take us back on your experience when you first found out that you were diagnosed with breast cancer. I know that a lot of our listeners, we want to make sure that we're not feeling alone. It can be so scary and overwhelming. So if you wouldn't mind taking us with you on your journey, I would love to hear how you found your lump. Was it self-detected? Did you go in through a routine mammogram? All of that good stuff. So let's get started. Thanks for being here with us today.
So I had been getting periodic mammograms since I was in my late 20s because I had a cousin who passed away of breast cancer. And cancer always kind of was definitely in our family. So I made it a point to always do self-exams. And my husband and I actually were on a business trip in Las Vegas and had just gone to a music festival, and we were hanging out in the hotel room, and I'm like, oh, I'm just laying here. I'll just do another breast exam, because that's what you do.
Yeah.
Beginning of the month. And it was at the top of my breast here on the left breast. And I went, well, that's not been there before. But it didn't feel like, they talk about a tumor can feel like a P, you can feel the defined edges. For me, it was just a hardness. It would just, instead of it being easy to push down, there was a definite hardness there, but no defined edges. And I just immediately knew. I froze, had my husband feel, and began the process when we got home of seeing my doctor, who I actually saw the physician's assistant first, who said, oh, it's just your fibroid cyst. I have dense breasts, lots of fibroids. It's just that. Went to get the mammogram, and it wasn't a diagnostic mammogram. It was just a regular mammogram. And the radiologist said, oh, it's just fibroids. Went back to the gynecologist and actually saw the gynecologist that time and said, there's something more here. This is not fibroids. And she did the exam and she said, okay, now you need to go do a diagnostic mammogram and an ultrasound. And thankfully, when I went back to the center for the scans, I had an on-call radiologist that day who listened to me and did not dismiss me. And he said, I absolutely feel this. I know exactly what's happening. And I looked at him and I said, I don't want that other guy doing my biopsy. Can you please do my biopsy for me? And he said, absolutely. And sure enough, he did it. And it came back already, stage 2, and had to then go to the process of finding a surgeon. Went to one who, she was fine. And then I, through connections of a school that I used to teach at in Clearwater, got connected with a surgeon in Clearwater, Florida, who he directed everything I needed to do. And in the process, my fellow homeroom teacher, who was brand new to the school, her named Liz, wonderful British woman living in the States. And she's like, what's going on with you? I'm like, nothing. I just met her. I don't need to vomit my things on her. And, finally she's like, what's going on? And I told her, and she said, I just finished chemotherapy 6 months ago, chemo and radiation. Same doctor group, same oncologist I was going to. And that's the person who told me about cold capping. She had this beautiful, thick blonde hair. And I'm like, how do you have your hair? And she told me about the cold caps and set me up with the company that did it. And in the meantime, my oncologist had said to me, I've heard about cold capping. It's something they've done in Europe for quite a while. It was not something they were doing in the United States. I mean, they didn't even have the Dignity cap at that time. You had to get either, I think it was Penguin cold caps, or the company I used was called Chemo cold caps.
Okay.
And yeah, so I had the lumpectomy in Thanksgiving, and then they did the mamma print and which is different than oncotyping. So I don't know much about oncotyping. So, all I knew from that was my risk of recurrence was high, and I would need to do 4 rounds of chemotherapy.
Okay.
So,
and what is the mamma print? Because I know I'm a little bit more familiar with the oncotype score. And
right.
So what is the mamma print? Is that still like blood work, or how does that?
It's a mamma print is done on the tumor. So once they remove the tumor, I think just like oncotyping, I think they send the tumor slides out, and they, decide what the grade is, how your margins, they give you your staging. I was estrogen, progesterone positive, and the other part, HER negative. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure with the mamma print how they determine the rate of recurrence. I do know it's based on testing the tumor.
Okay.
So that piece we went off of, and then I started chemotherapy on New Year's Eve.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Good times. I know.
You're like end of one chapter and jumping right into a new year. And I think the silver lining is like, well, we're killing it. We're, attacking the cancer as aggressively as possible. You bring up so many great points just here, if I can interrupt and pause for a moment, because you're talking about the need for advocacy as well. If we go back to these initial screenings, and, this was news to me too, to learn when you're going in for your mammogram that you have just regular mammogram imaging versus a diagnostic imaging test where they're doing more, I think 2 or 4 different angles and x-rays versus just coming in for your regular mammogram. What I'm hearing is, I think just the hat that we wear is alarming, because if you're going in for your mammogram, and even if you have dense tissue, we understand that the imaging is only going to be as good as those images, right? And so
correct.
If you felt something and you're being reassured that it's just fibroids, and I think people don't want to scare us. I hear that all the time, right? Like, oh, it's probably nothing. Let's just take a little check at it. Or it's probably this. And, once I do want to get a panel of radiologists actually on the podcast, because I think it would be helpful for our audience to learn why those conversations are happening. Not that it's good or bad, but just let us know why you feel so compelled to tell us that it's probably nothing. And then obviously in the work that we do, it's always something, because you're coming to survivingbreastcancer.org because you have cancer. So unfortunately, my perspective is a little skewed, because I'm not talking to the women who are saying it was probably nothing and it was nothing. We are talking to the women who say it was probably nothing and it ended up being something or spreading, which is always scary too. But I'm very glad to hear that we know our own bodies. Things do not feel normal. And I'm glad that you were able to keep pushing the envelope. And I also want to reiterate too, because you're not the first woman to share just the different levels of support we have on our medical care team. So whether it's your primary care doctor or the physician's assistant or the radiologist, but then going back to how important it is to have your like OBGYN talk to you about your breast tissue, like all of your female gynecological questions. I don't really think I have a good relationship with mine. I don't know. I think I go like once every couple years. And the more I'm having these conversations with women, I'm like, she needs to be my best friend. She needs to be like on my speed dial. And we need to talk all the time, because you're right. Like everyone has their own forte and expertise, and they could be someone who can really advocate for you, as in your example. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, I also believe that we we need to feel more comfortable to change doctors if they're not doing their job or if we're not getting the communication we need. Mm-hmm. And I really loved that gynecologist at the time. I had gone to her for a few years, but then I switched because the trust level was gone. And so I'm a firm believer that the more information, that even though it's so overwhelming, the information gives us power. And we get that information from meeting with at least two professionals, if you will, who can either confirm what the first person says, or maybe we find a better relationship with the second person, even if it's just in communication style. Mm-hmm. And that when we get the diagnosis, we're so afraid and we want to get it out. I want it gone. I want it out. Let's do this. There's the information so overwhelming. It's hard to breathe. It's hard to think of going to another doctor. Our medical care system in the States is not set up easily to see doctors, especially when we're working and trying to get time off and we're balancing our families and our children. So it's easier to see that one doctor when sometimes we need that other piece of information that could help direct us on a completely different path.
Yeah, completely. Gosh,
yes.
Scheduling of appointments, childcare, mm-hmm. working time off. I mean, all of these become barriers to access. Absolutely.
Yes. Yes.
So what a godsend, though. I think you also bring up an interesting point of, meeting this other new teacher in your school district who just mm-hmm. recently finished her experience with chemotherapy. And the more that people are doing cold caps or continuing to work while going through treatment, I think you also bring up another great point that we don't always know the baggage that we're carrying underneath it all. Mm-hmm. And yes. while we are managing our own cancer diagnosis, we could look mm-hmm. completely normal and completely fine and like we're going through nothing and we're working and smiling and maintaining. Yes. But then all of a sudden it's like, wait, you're going through chemotherapy right now? Like we just assume you would lose all of your hair. We just assume that you're going to look thin or frail. And, mm-hmm. I'm going to linger back on the word thin because I think with the breast cancer treatments, you're given so many medications that it's quite mm-hmm. common for women to gain weight actually while going through chemotherapy and some of the hormonal therapies as well. So, mm-hmm. I just want to acknowledge that, the quote unquote, like we look fine, but we're still going through so much is challenging because we don't look sick.
No, we don't. And I had a parent of mine who had been through breast cancer, and she did not do the cold capping. And she talked about that losing her hair was very difficult. But the flip side of it, people knew she was sick. Mm-hmm. And she said, so when I would go out, I would get not unwanted attention, but recognition for what I was going through. Mm-hmm. And so it's almost a catch-22. I was glad I was able to keep my hair. I did get a bald spot back here. My hair thinned quite a bit. Okay. But within about a year, it filled back in and the bald spot like went away. But yet I still looked fine. Right. So, on the one side, I thought, oh, it'd be nice if people could see what I'm going through. So I would get, an outward support of people. But on the other side, looking like me in the mirror, not seeing that drastic change helped me mentally just power through. Just get up in the day, go do what I need to do, and just, put it to the side. So it's an interesting thing.
That's a really good point. I love that. Like you want to look like yourself, you want to feel like yourself, and that mm-hmm. you could utilize this as a tool to muster up that energy. That's a really great point. I was about to ask you, like, how do you reconcile, the looking fine and going through so much?
Yes, I don't know. You just do. You just get up and you just do. And each day you hope for the best. And the hardest part I found was trying not to shame myself when I did not do more during the day, or when I laid in bed all day, moved from the bed to the couch, back to the bed. And I didn't take care of insurance stuff. I didn't eat healthy. I didn't exercise. I didn't get moving like they say to get moving, to get the chemo out of your system. And we don't realize how these thoughts really take a toll on us, I think, until we can step out of it and get away from it and sit and go, however we need to get through this is how we get through it.
Exactly.
And social media is fabulous for the support. And, it was hard to see women who were working out in the middle of chemo treatments or radiation. And I'm like, I'm happy I got out of bed, got into my car, and got to where I needed to be for the day.
Right. And social media too, I think, tends to take that angle of positivity. People are only going to publish the positive. So
Yes.
when they're proud of themselves for going to the gym or lifting weights
Right.
or taking a walk, they're going to share that. We're not going to share
Exactly.
I feel like crap, I look like shit, and here I am on social
Exactly.
media.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. There is an interesting thing, going back to the cold capping, and I'm not sure how widely known this is. It came out about 6 months to a year after I went through my chemo. I was put on TC, Taxotere, and Cytoxin. There is now a lawsuit out against the makers of Taxotere because a number of women did not get their hair back.
Mm.
And my oncologist was not aware of that at the time. And he brought that up to me and he said, I'm glad you cold capped. And he said, I have a few patients now who are experiencing their hair not coming back, having been on that. And it was so interesting to hear his perspective, being such a caring man. He felt so bad about it. He would feel, they even got the DigniCap system in their center based on what myself and my friend Liz had gone through. And it worked well in one center in Tampa, but it didn't work well in the center in Largo.
Mm.
And so it was very interesting to hear his perspective on things. I also find the hair growth is interesting as it comes back because my eyebrows didn't fill in like they used to be. My eyelashes didn't.
I was going to ask you, so with the cold caps, a couple of questions that I have is, okay, so there are a couple brands out there that you mentioned about cold caps. So how do you choose a brand? What type of research did you do? And then my second question is, we talk about cold caps that freeze the hair follicles so that the chemotherapy won't get to them and hopefully preserve as much as your hair as possible. But did you still lose your eyebrows and eyelashes?
Yes.
Okay.
I lost my eyebrows, my eyelashes. Any other hair I had on my body was gone. And I don't have to shave my legs that much anymore. It hardly grows back. I mean, that part's great. So yes. And in terms of researching, we ended up using the company my friend Liz did, which was the chemo cold caps. The woman named Liz who runs it had gone through cancer herself. I did research the penguin cold caps. Those were the only two I had heard of. I used breastcancer.org, the community discussion boards, for a lot of things because I did not have a group of like chemo sisters, if you will. At my cancer center, most of the patients were elderly, and I was one of the youngest people there. Other friends of mine who've been in their 30s who went to Moffitt cancer treatment in Tampa had chemo sisters, so people they walked through their journey with. So breastcancer.org became my go-to place. There was a group I joined, and we were all the chemo warriors starting in January of 2016. We talked about losing hair, cold capping, neuropathy, you name it, the conversation was there. And in doing the research, I realized this particular company that we chose to go with sent us a kit. She sent us the cooler, the caps, the temperature gauge, the gloves, everything we would need. All we had to do was get the dry ice. And the difference between the penguin cold caps was you had to go get all the other stuff. You had to provide your own cooler. You had to find the temperature gauge. You had to get whatever, the moleskin or whatever, to protect your forehead from getting frozen. It wasn't simple. And the drawback to the cold caps is that they weren't covered under insurance. So many women, again, there's no access to that. Now, whether that has changed, especially with the DigniCap system, I'm not sure. So I had Aflac that I had gotten back in my 20s. And I got it simply because cancer had been in my family. I'm like, I don't want to say it's a matter of time and be a fatalist, but yeah, there's a pretty good chance this is going to hit me at some point.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I had that influx of just extra money, supplemental cash that could pay for it. But not every woman has that. And my friend Liz and I have talked about what could we do to help other women who are interested in it. For some women, it was just one more thing they'd have to deal with. And it was easier just to lose their hair. Mm-hmm. Because the enormity of it, doing it on your own, you have to have someone there. We'd have to get to the cancer center by 8:30 a.m. We'd have to get the cold cap on an hour to 2 hours before the first infusion started. It was replaced every 30 minutes. So my husband was constantly checking the temperature, checking the dry ice. And it went on 2 to 3 hours after the infusion stopped. So we were at this chemo center the entire day. So the picture of, you have chemotherapy and you're snuggled in there and you're just letting the drugs hit you and you're done and you go home and sleep was not my experience, because every 30 minutes I was icing my head and snuggled under a heating blanket. And it was just, for me, the experience, it was very hard. Now, my friend who did the DigniCap system said it was great. It just did it. Nobody had to do it for her. The caps didn't have to be replaced. And she was in and out. It was like how you would view a chemo session to go, except you have a cold cap on your head.
Sure. And I'm hearing more and more cancer centers too now actually having infusion chairs specifically with the technology for the DigniCaps or other types of cold capping specifically.
Yes. Because
they are becoming more popular. People are looking for that as an option. So I do hear that. I do think you bring up a great point too about the financial side of this. And, that's something I can investigate and look into also, because I don't think just from talking to other women that it's not covered by insurance. And so, what type of fundraising or opportunities can nonprofits like survivingbreastcancer.org or breastcancer.org do to help provide this as an option for people?
There is an organization in Minnesota. I would have to research it when we're done talking and email you the information. And it was something to help women offset these costs. Mm-hmm. But again, that was a number of years ago, and I'm not sure where that is, but I would love to look into that again.
Yeah. The other option that I saw for women, they still lost their hair, but what they ended up doing when they got their hair trimmed and shortened, creating those like halos. It's almost like it's not quite a full wig, but it's kind of like like a halo with your long hair or whatever type of hair that you had that you could wear like underneath your hat or a scarf or something like that. And women felt like even though they lost their hair, it was still their hair that they were putting back on when they were going out to shop or go to the grocery store or go do something with a girlfriend. And I think there's some some studies where we can investigate and figure out like the level of confidence and security and well-being people feel when they can look and feel like themselves, not going through chemotherapy. I admire everything that you've gone through. I fell into the camp of I can't deal with one more thing.
Exactly.
Managing cancer was hard enough, and the side effects. So, can you tell me about some of the side effects that you had, and then how you? And were there any side effects outside of like a really cold head that people should be aware of with cold capping?
Not with the cold capping.
Okay.
No, it was just. I experienced nausea from it, but I think that was the first infusion, and it was because we had to leave the cancer center early because they were closing early, being on New Year's Day. So the whole day was just not a good day. After that, we kind of fell into a rhythm, and it was only 4 chemo treatments. So my side effects were more chemo related than the cold capping related.
Okay.
As time went on. Now I had a friend who did the cold capping for, I think 8 treatments. She came and saw what I was doing, and she said, "Oh, I'm going to do that too." And it was her second bout with breast cancer. And she did the same thing we did. And sure enough, her hair, she saved more of her hair than I did. So her body handled it better than mine did. So that's what I find fascinating, is how each person's bodies react differently.
Right. Did you have to take any precautions in terms of like how you brushed your hair or shampooed or anything like that?
Yes. So I was not allowed to wash my hair for almost a week. I had to sleep on like a silky pillow, like a silky pillowcase. I don't think I hardly ever brushed my hair. I might run one comb through it once. When I'd wash my hair, I had to change shampoos to something more gentle. I used the beauty counter
Oh, yes.
shampoos because they were, yeah. And that was mainly it. They said, don't wear a cap, don't pull it in a ponytail, don't put any stress on your hair, just leave it alone. And the best thing is that they warned us that your hair will shed. And I think it was after the second session, they said, be prepared, it's going to come out. It's going to happen. And so it's funny that I still even have a little PTSD after that. Our condo here has white tile floor and my hair's all over the floor. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
And it still affects me today, seeing my hair on the floor or if I'm in the shower and a clump comes out, I'm like, oh, what's happening?
Right.
So after the cold capping, chemo, and radiation, and losing my eyebrows and eyelashes, they came back. But then a couple months later, I lost them again.
Mm.
And then they had to grow back in. So it was like this cyclical thing where the medication was still clearly in my system months after I had finished it.
Yes. And that happened to me as well. I was getting, I lost all of my hair, but when the peach fuzz started coming back, I was so excited. And then people were warning me too, like, well, don't be too excited because your eyebrows still look good. Those are going to go in a little bit. And so it was just this continuation of the treatments working, which is how I was reframing it, as opposed to just dwelling on the loss. But I think that's when I probably looked the most sick was when I lost my eyebrows and eyelashes because, those, like, I got so mad. I was like, even babies are born with these, like, babies can be bald, but they show up with their eyelashes. And, I don't take for granted. Like, my eyes were constantly like dry. I got so much dust and dirt just because you don't realize the importance of your eyelashes. And then I constantly had a runny nose because you lose those tiny hairs in your nose also. So there's small little things where you're like, I was posting on social media. I was like, guys, did you know that this like is really important? So, yeah.
The other thing, thinking about it when you're talking about your hair and these different things that happen, is the effect on our bones, in our teeth, our hearing. All of these things they don't tell you. Our vaginal health, they don't tell you anything about this. I had to learn about it from just talking to other people who had gone through it. And that's why we just have to share this information for the women who are starting on this journey, because it is so overwhelming. And we have this term in our family called whack-a-mole. You fix one thing and something else pops up, and that's cancer. You fix one thing and then you got to whack something else down, and then you got to whack something else down. And before you know it, you're just,
It's really tough. I mean, you're 5 years out. Congratulations. That is just a huge milestone in general. And that's the perfect analogy, like whack-a-mole. That is exactly what life after cancer feels like. It's a gift that keeps on giving and something we have to continuously manage. I think the more we talk about that, the more we understand the long-term side effects and implications of a breast cancer diagnosis will help empower all of us to take control of our health and our well-being and really being able to be an active player in managing side effects and long-term wellness. So thank you so much for going into this detail to share your experience with the cold caps, the resources that our listeners can look up. I'll link to a lot of this information below in the show notes as well. And we'll just keep the conversation going. I look forward to talking to you again next week. Thank you for tuning in and listening to our podcast. If you would like to find out more about our organization and upcoming events and ways to connect, you can find out more by visiting our website at survivingbreastcancer.org. I would like to acknowledge that all of the information on our podcast is from personal experiences, and it is not a substitute for professional medical advice. You should always consult your medical care team. If you're looking for specific topics or would like to be a guest on our show, feel free to contact me directly at laura@survivingbreastcancer.org. And of course, we have a couple social media handles you can follow us at as well. For example, survivingbreastcancer.org, all one word, as well as our podcast specifically, Breast Cancer Conversations. Until next time, keep on thriving.